Hey y'all, it's Carly. Welcome back to High Country Homesteading. I had an early morning this morning, got the kids up, made some pancakes, got my coffee ready, and I knew I had a long day of cooking ahead. Today I decided to make a bunch of beef bone broth from a bunch of soup bones that I had in the freezer. So I made sure to have a good morning, get everyone settled, and then I settled in for a good long day of cooking beef, making the broth, and then pressure canning it all to make sure that we had nice, nutritious, and delicious broth for the fall and winter. So today I'm going to be using my Instant Pot. This is my favorite way to make bone broth. It's the quickest way. You don't have to keep your stove on for 24 hours, and it's quicker than a crock pot. So I just absolutely love using my Instant Pot for broth. Really what I've made today is stock because of the length of time that I've cooked it, and because I'm also putting a couple of things like onions, celery, carrots, garlic, and stuff like that in it. But the reason that it's also considered bone broth is because the longer you cook it, the more gelatin and collagen that you get from those bones, and that's where a lot of the nutrition is. And after we do all that, we're going to be pressure canning it so that it can be shelf stable for the winter. Beef broth is a little bit tricky to pressure can because has a lot of fat content. So it is tricky to make sure that you have a really good seal on your cans because the fat content can make it so that jars don't seal quite tight enough, but we are able to overcome that today, and I'll show you how I do it. So my first step whenever I'm making broth is getting all of my vegetables ready. So today I'm going to be using some onions, some carrots, and I haven't peeled the carrots, I've just washed them pretty well. I'm also going to be using some celery and a couple of cloves of garlic. And as you saw before, I went to the garden and I just snipped off a little bit of rosemary and thyme that I'm going to throw in there as well. Now, the one thing that I love about broth is that you can just use things, scraps really, that you have in your freezer. What I like to do typically is whenever I'm making meals and I'm cutting up onions or carrots or things like that, you can keep all of what you would typically have as scraps. So onion peels, bits of onion that you've chopped off, the tops of carrots, anything like that you can keep in a freezer bag, put it in your freezer and keep adding to it. Same with bones. If you cook, say, a whole chicken, you can, once you take all the meat off the bones, you can throw your chicken bones or chicken carcass into a freezer bag, put that in the freezer, and once you accumulate enough bones to fill up a pot, then throw them in your Instant Pot and make bone broth. It's such a good way to not put anything to waste and make sure that you're using every bit of whatever animal you're cooking with. And it makes me feel good, and it's a good way to make sure that you're a good steward of that meat. But today I'm using beef. This is from our half cow that we bought last December. So I'm using these soup bones, filling up my Instant Pot, and you can see that these have a lot of meat on them. So typically you can skip a step if you have, say, just chicken bones or with no meat on them. But since I have to get the meat off of these first before I use just the bones to make bone broth, I'm throwing them in my pot with just some garlic and some onion. And I'm also going to throw on top of there some salt and pepper, and I'm going to cook the meat off of these bones. So once I get everything in, I'm going to put first about 2 cups of water. You don't need too much, but since I have a really full pot, I put a little bit more water in there, close the lid, and then I'm going to be cooking this for 2 hours, pressure cook. And this is going to make some extremely tender, fall off the bone beef that we're then going to shred and put away. Some I put away for dinner that night. I use it for dinner the next day, and then I freeze the rest. So we are not wasting anything. And another way that I like to make sure that this is no waste is that I take all of my scraps, peels from onion, garlic, carrots, and I'm gonna go bring them out to my chickens, and they'll enjoy this as a nice little treat. Here are our girls Polly and Poppy and our rooster Giuseppe. And Polly and Poppy are the only two hens we have laying eggs right now. All of the others should start laying eggs within the next week or two. But they have the same mother but different fathers. So Poppy lays a green egg and Polly lays a brown egg. The green egg layer has an Americana father, and the brown egg layer has a salmon Faverolles father. So it's very interesting. Definitely chicken and egg colored genetics I can see why people get into it, but I'm excited to see what our next batch of chickens lay. So back to the Instant Pot. So this is done cooking. It's been 2 hours, and what we're going to do next is shred all of the beef, and we're just going to be left with whatever broth is in there, the beef bones, and the onion and garlic that we had put in before in the pot. So we're going to keep everything else in the pot, and that's when we'll add the rest of our vegetables. But I'm going to get off as much of this beef as possible so we can put it away for dinner and for future freezer meals. To the pot, I'm going to add the rest of our garlic, our onions, some celery, carrots, and that fresh rosemary and thyme that we got from the garden. I'm also going to add a splash of apple cider vinegar. It helps extract all that good collagen from the bones, and a couple bay leaves, and then we're going to top it up with water, and I just make sure this is to the fill line to get as much broth as possible. We'll put the lid on, and I'm going to cook this for another 2 hours. Typically, if I'm skipping the step of cooking meat, I will go for 3 hours to get the most flavorful broth. But since we've already semi-cooked it a little bit for 2 hours, I'm just going to go for another 2 hours. But now I've got my digital pressure canner all set up. I put the jars in so that they can start warming, because we're going to put hot broth into hot jars. So there it is, all done. I've done the pressure release of the Instant Pot, and now we have all of this delicious broth that we're going to be putting into our hot jars, and then we're going to pressure can it. I'm putting a strainer into a large bowl so that we can separate all of the broth from the larger items, the larger vegetables and bones that are in there. It's going to catch all that, and then we're just going to be left with the nice clear broth in the bowl. Once my jars are warm, I'm going to use this jar funnel and start ladling all of the broth into each of the jars, filling them up and making sure there's about 1 inch of headspace left in the jar. Once every jar is full, I'm taking a cloth with some vinegar and I'm going to wipe each rim of each jar. This is a very important step, like I said, when it comes to beef broth, because it is so fatty and it's easy for the rim of that jar to have a lot of residue on it. And if you leave some of that residue, then your lid's not going to get a good seal on the jar and it's not going to be shelf stable. So make sure that you take your time and really do a good job of wiping the rims of those jars to make sure that there's not any fatty residue left on them. But once that's done, you can put the ring on each of your jars. Just make sure it's only fingertip tight, not too tight. And then we will start putting these in our canner. I have 3 quarts of hot water in this canner, and I did only pint-sized jars, and I think I fit 7 jars in here. Once we put the lid on and lock it into place, then we can get our pressure canner up and running. It's going to heat. I now have the regulator put back on, and then we can start the pressure canning process. These are going to pressure can for 20 minutes. And once it's done, I'm going to turn the pressure canner off, and then I'm going to use my jar lifter to take all of the hot jars off and put them on a towel. Make sure you're always putting them on a towel because they are so hot, and typically things like granite countertops are very, very cold. So it's nice to have that bit of a buffer there to make sure nothing happens. And here they are. It's a beautiful amber color. You're going to see some boiling afterwards because it's still so hot. And there's that big fat line there once they've cooled. So this is a very fatty thing to can, but you could also cool your broth down and take the fat layer off and then heat it up and put it into the jars if you don't want that layer of fat there. But I give everything a little tap to make sure that there's no hollow sounds, because that means that the seal did not take well. And also I lift every single jar up just by the lid to make sure that I can tell if it's loose or not. And all of these did really, really well. So thank you so much for joining me today. I hope you subscribe and stay tuned for some more cooking and gardening and homesteading videos, and I will see you next time. Bye.